The budget is out and so is the fine print, and let's closely analyze the fine print and find out if it indeed was a budget devoid of big ideas, and why really is India Inc. so disappointed with budget 2012. Joining us a special panel, Nainal Kidwai, country head of HSBC India. We've also got Vinita Bali from Britannia, and economist Professor Bibek Debra joins us live from our studios in New Delhi. Nainal Kidwai, I want to kick this off with you first up. What do you think was the big idea in the budget? Was there anything that you liked about the budget, or do you think it was a budget devoid of big ideas?
I rather go with the view that it's a tolerable budget. It's a budget which, in a backdrop of high fiscal deficit, has attempted to do a very tough balancing act. And if indeed we can achieve the fiscal deficit 5.1% number which has been set out, it's a very laudable objective. And I think all attention has to be on ensuring that we can keep our expenditure, particularly on subsidies, contained at the 2% as has been set out, with a view to achieving a fiscal deficit reduction down to 5.1%. So it is, to my mind, a pretty laudable budget in view of the circumstances we're in.
Professor Debra, in many ways, the expectation was the big idea would have been the fiscal consolidation to be addressed. Even that went missing?
Well, in a way, 5.1% looks respectable enough. But I have three problems with that particular number. And I'm not going to use the word tolerable for the very simple reason that the Trinamool has used it. The three problems I have, one is relatively minor. I don't believe the real rate of growth of 7.6%, but that does not matter. That's in the denominator, and inflation, I think, will be more, so that will be compensated. What I do not believe is, one, the subsidy figure, particularly on petroleum products and also on food subsidies, more on petroleum products. And secondly, I do not quite believe the non-tax revenue inflows. I think they are exceedingly high. Now, if either of those two go wrong, then you're not going to get 5.1%.
So essentially, we said that we could do a lot, and we've given some really ambitious numbers, but we don't know what's the way to those numbers. Okay, Vinita Bali, to bring you in, I mean, you've got a pulse on the consumer. In many ways, this budget gave them a little bit of money, but often such stories turn out to be inflationary at the end, sort of defeating that purpose. What was your biggest disappointment this budget?
The biggest disappointment really is, if I were to start off by what the finance minister said, and that is about how do we drive better demand or better consumption demand in India, then it is hard to see how that is going to happen with things like excise duty and service tax having gone up. I think the other point, which is a point of concern, I guess, to everybody, and this was mentioned by the finance minister himself, is what is going to be that mechanism of governance that will ensure that the fiscal deficit is kept at the 5.1% and also that subsidies don't exceed 2% of GDP. So there is a lot of balancing that is required, and there is a lot of effective implementation of policies and programs that is required. And there is no doubt in my mind that this is going to be an inflationary budget, primarily because of the hike in excise duty and the introduction of the negative list when it comes to service tax. Because, earlier, where there was a restrictive list of categories on which service tax was applicable, now going by the negative list, there is a much larger scope of services that is going to be included in service tax, and frankly, that raises the cost of everything for everybody.
Okay, the budget is inflationary. That's the verdict from Vinita Bali. Nainal Kidwai, I want to get you in here. Do you also agree with that view that it's inflationary in nature? Because while the FM has left more money in the hands of the consumer, he's also hiked excise and service tax, and so in effect, the consumer is possibly worse off.
That is so, and these hikes will of course be passed on to consumers. So to that extent, there is some stated inflation in terms of cost of goods, to the extent they will be passed on to consumers. Not all goods will be able to pass it on. some may have to absorb it, and to that extent it will be less inflationary. So yes, it is marginally inflationary. The big inflation costs will come off fuel subsidy, and where fuel costs begin to filter down, as they should, down to individual users. I think it's an important one, and which is why it is going to be interesting to see how the government tackles those aspects of subsidy, because the balancing act there is, you don't want to continue to subsidize the sector to the extent you do on the one hand, but on the other, if you begin to remove it too sharply, it's inflationary, because it impacts all segments, through transportation and fuel costs.
Vinita Bali, I want to get you back in on this. The finance minister has also tweaked the income tax slabs and leaves a little more money in the consumer's wallet. But do you think that's going to be completely negated by the hike in excise duty, and so it won't really spur consumption demand?
Well, let's look at it this way. The people who are going to be impacted by the tax slab, the taxable income slab going up from 8 lakhs to 10 lakhs, are going to have a benefit of a total of 20% on 2 lakhs, which is 10% on 2 lakhs, which is 20,000 rupees annually. On the other hand, they are going to end up paying more because of the hike in excise duties, because of the increase in service tax. So overall, it is not about putting more money into the hands of people for disposable income. It is, giving them a little but taking a lot away, or a lot more than what we've given them away through indirect taxes.
Professor Devoid, what everyone's essentially coming to is the consumer. Now, let me take you to the corporate, where the tax deals being, taken in from a retrospective effect, it's already playing out this Monday, and the markets are pretty upset and low on that story. Is the government basically trying to hit back because they lost faith in the deal with Vodafone?
On that particular case, yes. But I want to step back a bit before I focus on this. In 220 paragraphs, I don't have the big picture. There's a little bit of tinkering here, there's a little bit of tinkering there, but I don't have the big picture. And what is the big picture? How do I stimulate growth? What is the big picture? How do I switch away from public expenditure to private consumption expenditure, and more importantly, private investment? I don't have that. Now, had I had
crowd out with the kind of government borrowing program.
That's right, absolutely. In addition, if I'm going to have that big picture, I ought to be coming clean, and the Vodafone judgment should not have been buried in the finance bill. It ought to have been right there in the budget speech. That is the reason I don't like this budget. It's not honest. It's not dishonest on the numbers, and it's dishonest in terms of what it conveyed through the budget speech.
Interesting. Okay, Naina, let's get your take on that whole, tax rules issue. The industry seems to be of the view that it's going to hurt foreign investments. The finance minister calls this a sense of clarity to tax laws. Are you really buying that argument, given that, this deal has been one where it was clear government lost out?
I think the issue, though, broadly, is much more about not just about the single legislation regarding Vodafone, because it isn't about Vodafone. It is about retrospective legislation, generally speaking, and there are other items in the tax bills which would suggest that there's some element of retrospective legislation. So any retrospective legislation is not good. Clarity is what is being sought, clarity up front, the ability to seek advance ruling, and that too, again, therefore, in the interest of clarity. So we want clear legislation. We want legislation where if it isn't clear at the edges, you can get clarity up front, and thereafter, if there has to be regulation or change or indeed clarification, let it be prospective. So that is the requirement of industry. It isn't about foreign investment alone. It also does impact our image abroad, but that's a separate matter. It is about creating the right investment climate for industry. Industry needs certainty, and that certainty is important.
Fair point. Naina Kidwai, you raised this issue yesterday in the industry finance minister interaction. How did you read the body language of FinMin officials? The finance secretary seemed pretty combative. It didn't seem as if they were willing to reconsider this move. How did you read the body language?
See, one cannot disagree with the fact that if you have a place of business in India, you need to pay some tax. And if that is the intention of the law, then it needs to be clearly stated upfront. It can't take 30 years for a clarification to emerge where, if it was so clear in the first place, there wouldn't be so much litigation around it. So, to my mind, it is, one cannot disagree with the norm which says India needs tax, and in order to get tax, you want to widen the net, and that net needs to be very clearly articulated. But we are really, it's more about the principle right now of clear articulation, and if you want a company which then changes hands and that has a place of business in India to pay tax, that's fine, but let's state it up front, be very clear what that tax is, and let those companies that want to invest come in knowing all of that with their eyes open.
And not wait for budgets to come and make that clarification. Professor Debra, I want to ask you one question. You talked about the whole big picture. This budget is not for the consumer nor for the corporate, and it doesn't have anything big on policy. The question is, has he left anything to do as a to-do list for the rest of the year based on his budget? What is he going to do, I mean, in terms of reform?
You know, there are all kinds of different reforms. There are a lot of legislative stuff that's pending. There are issues connected with the rail fare hike. There are issues connected with FDI and multi-brand retail, opening up the financial sector, legislation there. But I think the most immediate one, which I wish had been done before the budget, is the hike in petroleum product prices.
Right.
Because given the way the Congress is handling the allies, I don't think that's going to happen either.
And despite the hints that came in from the finance minister and the PM that, you know, subsidy being capped at 2% and so on, gave this big hope that there will be an immediate sort of move on the other side after the budget.
Yes, but on the subsidy figure also, remember that 2% is not really a decline. It seems to be a decline compared to the revised figures of last year. But compared to the budgeted figure of last year, it's not a decline. It's where it always was.
So the budget is where things have been and nothing much has moved. That's the verdict of everyone here, including the two ladies on from India Inc. and Professor Dev Roy. Thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.